We got Amir, pronouns he, him, from the UK. He's a theist. And he says, God is the best explanation as to why anything at all exists. This is a perfect way to end it because I know this is such a concise question with such a concise answer that will be easy to tease apart. Amir, welcome to Skep Talk. Can you hear us?
I can hear you guys just fine. Can you hear me okay?
Wonderful, we can. Tell us a little bit more about your question/statement.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me on. Just before we get into the nitty gritty, I just want to zoom out for a second and ask, are there any topics that even you two as atheists might disagree on? You know, things like free will versus determinism or moral realism versus moral relativism, I don't know, veganism versus eating meat, anything at all?
That me and Aaron might disagree with?
Yeah.
I don't know, Aaron. What would we disagree with? I don't know. Well, okay, you go first. I have an idea of something we might disagree with.
So, trying to think here. Well, obviously, what's the best science? The answer is obviously physics.
And it's obviously biological anthropology, but that's fine. That's fine. We can put that aside. It's okay. People are allowed to be wrong on this show. We can still be friends.
Okay. I mean, look, the reason I'm asking is because these are debates that even atheists don't agree on. And yet all of us, believers or not, we use the same cognitive faculties to evaluate them. We ask, things like, is it logical? Is it supported by evidence? Does it align with my values or intuition, etc.? So there's a deeper point in all of this. The tools that we assess whether God exists, reason, intuition, experience, logic, etc., these are all the same tools that we use to decide if capitalism is better than socialism or if morality is real or relative. It could easily be the case that me and Erika both believe that capitalism creates better outcomes than socialism, whilst Aaron might strongly disagree. And we're all using our minds in good faith. And this inevitably brings me to the point about psychology. Our beliefs are not formed in a vacuum. It's filtered through everything that makes us who we are, our upbringing, our emotional drivers, our cognitive biases. So my question is, if people can reasonably disagree about nearly everything using the same reasoning faculties, then what does that say about the belief in God?
So let me step back here because I think there are things that the vast majority of humans do agree on. For example, I think the vast majority of people would say we are standing on the earth. And the main reason we can all have strong consensus to that is that we all clearly observe the same sort of thing. So it's only those who are trying to be difficult who will say that they're not standing on earth, either because they're jumping for one moment or they're just trying to be pedantic in some sort of way. But, we're all agreeing we're on the surface of this body that we call the earth. Now, there are things that we disagree about, and in part because we may not all have access to the same sort of evidence. Just to give an example, if you are, for example, here in the good old US of A, and you've gone through a homeschooling curriculum, so you've never actually learned any true facts about evolution, then you might think that evolution is a bunch of godless nonsense created by communist Marxists, Neoplatonists, who knows what's its, and not know anything about endogenous retroviruses or anything else like that because you've been mistaught. But once you actually talk to someone who does have those facts, then you might change your mind. The main way that we, in the sciences, actually come to a consensus is we all bring our evidence together and put the puzzle together, and then eventually, hopefully, come to some consensus on things. So, for example, almost all chemists will agree atoms exist. There might be one out there who's a weirdo, but I think there's a strong consensus amongst chemists atoms exist because of the powerful evidence for that. That consensus did not exist 200 or 300 years ago, but it's absolute now. If we bring this now to God belief, the fact that we see such gargantuan diversity might suggest, hey, we're not all, quote unquote, observing the same thing. And there seems to be great cultural relativity to the gods that people believe in, which makes it seem like, oh, maybe it's actually not truth-seeking that we have these God beliefs because they seem to be so culturally deterministic rather than evidentially deterministic. So I don't know if that's where you wanted to go with this discussion, but that's where my train of thought went down.
Okay. And Erika, is there anything that you wish to add to that?
No, I think that's a good starting off point. Let's see where we can take it from there.
Okay. I mean, to that point, I completely take what you're saying, Aaron. You see, if pretty much everyone is unanimously convinced that we are all on Earth, we could almost take that as gospel. We don't need to try to dispute something that is so, blaringly obvious. With something like God, there's going to be people that would have counter arguments and say that such discussions are not even scientific in the first instance. This is why there's going to be a large contingent of scientists who believe in God. And so it goes back to the original question. If people can reasonably disagree about nearly everything using the same reasoning faculties, then what does that actually say about a belief in God? I mean, my conclusion from it is probably the most intellectually honest thing that we can do is call ourselves agnostics, or just people that are undecided on the matter, rather than having a firm belief in God or a non-belief in God. I tend to find that the truth usually sits somewhere in the middle, and this is just a point that is going to be debated to the nth degree. Even after this conversation, we're going to continue debating it, and we're never going to have an actual conclusive verdict,
No, I mean, I agree with some of that, right? So like I take a firm stance that it's like, yeah, I don't think the concept of deism can be investigated scientifically. I don't think that the idea that a deity or an afterlife exists is something that we can look into with science. We can certainly look into aspects of organized religion with science. We can look at the historicity of claims. We can look at the archaeology of events that are said to have happened. We can look at the prevalence of miracles or NDEs or whatever, and have that help inform our perspective. But yeah, I'm wholeheartedly in the same boat with that. Now, there's places that we could take this, right? Like, I also think that the most honest position is to say, I don't know, but I'm not convinced. That's where I stand, and that's what I'm public about here on this channel. But what do you think, Aaron?
So there are, I think, at least some versions of the God concept that we can actually say there is strong argument or strong evidence against. If you believe in the God that created the universe 6,000 years ago, sorry, but pretty much every science, including dentistry, is against that. And I say also dentistry because creationists deny that T-Rex ate meat. So, like, in the most absurd places that even you have to fight the dentists about what teeth are for to be a young Earth creationist. In that extreme case, I would say the science is strongly against. Other places, it might be more philosophical. So when it comes to a personal God who wants to have a relationship with as many people as possible, there's this clever argument called the argument from non-resistant non-belief, that if there's a personal God who exists and he wants to have relationships with people, there ought not to exist any people that are open to a relationship with him that would be non-believers. But there do appear to be non-resistant non-believers. Therefore, this is at least strong evidence, if not a straightforward disproof of the existence of that kind of God. So often, to get to the point where you say, well, I don't know one way or the other, we usually have to have a God concept so nebulous, it's hard to tell the difference between existence and non-existence. So I tend to go for, okay, is there any evidence for anything supernatural? Is there any evidence for things that cannot be explained or that are not consistent with naturalism? And so far, everything appears to be consistent with naturalism, and everything that's an interesting question that we can't answer has been answered by progressing down naturalism than not naturalism. And so I would say I'm going to keep betting on the horse that keeps winning, because the other horse has never won a single race.
I would even argue that if something couldn't be explained with naturalism in the immediate present, naturalism has a wonderful history of sometimes not being able to answer a question in the present. And then once we get better data, once we get better equipment, we can answer it down the line.
But I think critically where the argument comes is when we're talking about God, we then are bringing in questions around the origins of naturalism themselves, because you see, natural processes are part of the universe's system and thus cannot account for the system's origin. And explaining the origins of naturalism requires an external cause or a foundational assumption of self-existence. And this is when we start going into...
is that also true for a supernatural thing? Does a supernatural entity need an explanation for its own existence?
Well, this is when we get to things that are contingent versus things that are necessary. And for there to be a necessary existence that is not contingent on anything else, that we can call God, I think that leads to less absurdities than to think of the naturalistic explanations that could circumvent that. For example, an infinite past.
So there's two things there.
Or an eternal,
one is that
it
doesn't actually
universe.
Explain. Well, there's two things. One, that doesn't explain why the supernatural is going to be better than that. And two, why not just say that the natural world is actually necessary? Because here's the other state, absolute nothingness. Is that even a logically coherent state? Because one might say, hey, a state of absolutely nothing, there's also nothing that prevents it from changing into something. That nothingness may be either completely incoherent, or there's nothing that keeps it in that nothingness state because there's no laws, and so it can become something. In that sense, nature exists automatically because the non-existence of nature becomes incoherent. So I don't see why supernaturalism gets past the problems, and whatever things you might say about the supernatural being necessary, I don't see why we can't say the exact same things about the natural world.
For me, it also goes back to you have to preclude all of the current natural explanations and also preclude the new ones as they come out before you can appeal to the supernatural, in my opinion, right? It's also okay to just say, we don't have the answer to this question at this time. That doesn't mean that you can just kind of slip the supernatural in there, right? I think everybody would do a lot better if we were more comfortable with saying, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, you see, claiming that naturalism is a proved fact is arbitrary and provable. You know, a self-existing God provides a more coherent explanation because God's nature,
Why?
unlike naturalism...
Wait, you're saying its nature is to exist. I will just say the same thing about time, because there's no time where time does not exist. Therefore, time is necessary because there's no time before time. This is, unfortunately, a trivially easy thing to do.
Yeah, there's no time before time. But are you therefore implying that
so there's no time that the universe did not exist?
Sure, there's no time before. Are you suggesting that time has a starting point, of time has always existed? Sorry, what's the implication of the statement?
So on either one, though, I'm saying that if there is no time that the universe does not exist, we don't have to explain when the universe comes into existence, or it depends on something earlier, because if it just always exists, because it is not even possible for it not to exist because of the nature of time, for example, that it's not possible to talk about time without time or a universe without time, then you realize, oh, it's just not even coherent to talk about this. Therefore, talking about it being contingent is incoherent.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I also think it's incoherent to talk about an eternal past that lacks a first cause, because that leads to an infinite regress.
Does God have an eternal past?
God, you see, that question is loaded, because to say he has an eternal past still puts God within the parameter of time, and God transcends time completely. So things like an eternal past.
If God is outside of time, how does he do anything in time? The thing is, the things that are outside of time means outside of causality. Therefore, God causes nothing, because to be in time is to be causal.
Well, no, I don't think that's fair to say. I think that if something could transcend,
I think that's actually the words that we're using.
Space.
That's the problem, is that we have to define words in such a way to not automatically dismiss God, which is a way of having a terrible, terrible hypothesis. If you have to change the meanings of words as you go along, so that way you don't instantly throw it in the waste bin.
Sure, but that's where we get into very kind of, call it trivial semantics, because there are terms that philosophers and theologians have coined up, like sans creation, that God exists sans creation, because that therefore implies there is no temporal element to God. He exists.
And they say that because they can't realize any other way to get around this. It's basically kind of like, I don't know what your religious background is, but it's like the Trinitarian Christians saying God is three people and one people at the same time. There's no contradiction. Stop saying there's a contradiction. When in reality, you're just basically saying, I'm going to declare something that sounds incoherent, but I'm going to say there is some way that it's not incoherent, therefore I'm right, therefore I should believe everything I claim. It's not actually an argument, it's an apologetic.
Hey, look, so when I participated in this call, my claim was God is the best explanation as to why anything at all exists. And I think if we're going to be honest with ourselves, whatever explanation there is as to why anything at all exists is going to be absurd to us, whether the universe is eternal, time is eternal, or whether God created it. All of these things defy our conventions and intuition. Any option, whatever option you can fathom, is going to go and defy our intuitions. And so
I have no intuitional problem with an infinite universe in the past. I see no intuition that breaks.
Oh, well, I mean, I can bring a ton of issues why there's issues with an eternal past, problems with infinity. You see, look, an infinite past cannot logically
there actually
lead to
aren't
the
problems with infinity. We actually talked about this with the previous caller. First off, there's different size infinities, and if you're going to go to like Hilbert's Hotel or things like that, I'm going to have to point out this is actually not a logical problem with the concept of infinity. There actually aren't these issues except for people who want them to be issues to argue for God, and somehow God is infinite, but not that kind of infinite that's impossible. It's the possible kind of infinities, not the impossible kind of infinities, which is, again, let's redefine words so we don't throw it in the trash.
Well, you see, look, Hilbert's Hotel illustrates the conceptual issues with actual infinities, whether abstract or physical. You see, claiming the universe operates on principles beyond intuition without evidence doesn't resolve these paradoxes, but instead of just
actually it does. It's actually completely mathematically consistent. There is not a logical problem with Hilbert's Hotel. Now, what is everyone wondering with this hotel? This goes back to the issue I was talking to you earlier about with Erika, with the different size and infinities. So imagine a hotel with a countable number of rooms. An infinite number of rooms starts with 1, 2, 3, etc., forever. Now, every room is occupied, and a person comes up to the counter and says, "I would like a room, please." Now, your first thought would be, well, all the rooms are occupied, but you, a very clever person running the hotel, will say, I can occupy, or I can bring this other person to a room. Everyone in their current room just move down one down the hall, and every room can move to the next room down the hall because it could be matched in that one-to-one mapping, which opens up the first room that allows that person in. And we could do this with 2 people, 10 people, an infinite number, a countable infinite number of people can come in, and we can accommodate all of them. But if an uncountable set of people come in, we can't accommodate them in our infinite rooms. So that's where
I agree. There are different types of infinities, but you see, look, the disconnect between mathematical possibility and empirical reality. There's a disconnect there. You see, look, mathematics, it operates on an abstract, idealized concepts, and that ignores real-world constraints like perfect circles.
So where's the real-world constraint with there always being a cause before a previous cause? Because if you're saying the problem is Hilbert's Hotel, but you also say there's no logical problem there, then why bring up Hilbert's Hotel?
No, I'm saying there's a problem with being able to traverse infinity. How would I say there's a fundamental issue? If the past is infinite, it would require crossing an infinite sequence of moments to reach the present. And since infinity
if you have an infinite amount of time to do an infinite number of things, problem solved. Stop telling me things are impossible when they're trivially true.
Well, okay. Well, I mean, to that point, I'll ask you, imagine trying to count all the integers starting from negative infinity to 0. You would never finish counting because
that's
no matter how much time
because
you
there is no negative infinity as a starting point. If you start with a false premise, you will get false conclusions.
But if the past is eternal, then you are starting from negative infinity. How is that not?
No, you're not. Because the word starting means there's a starting point, but there's no starting point. There's only a point. You can always just imagine moving that point further and further back. But again, infinite amount of time to cover an infinite distance, no problem. Just do it 1 second per second. Problem solved.
You cut. Sorry, the line cut out there. Aaron, can you just repeat the last part of what you said, please?
You can cover an infinite number of seconds if you go 1 second per second for an infinite amount of time. Problem solved.
Look, think of a line of dominoes just stretching infinitely into the past, where each domino represents a moment in time. For the last domino to fall, which represents now, every prior domino must have fallen first. But if the chain is infinite, there is no first domino to start the sequence, meaning the last domino could never fall. And to make the analogy relevant, an infinite past would prevent us from reaching the last domino, which represents the present.
there is no last domino, there is no first domino, there is no problem. That's
But
how you
there
do
is
with an
a
infinite
domino
number
because
line.
we're all,
You don't say there's a starting point
yeah.
to your infinite number line and then make premises based on there being a starting point to something that doesn't have a starting point. Like I said, if you start with a false premise, you're not going to get to a reliable, true conclusion.
What's the false premise exactly? Sorry, highlight it to me one more time.
You
What's
said
the
that there's a
premise that's false?
starting point infinite from the past. But the thing is, if you're going back infinitely, there is no starting point.
No. Sorry, I think something has been lost in translation. I'm saying that if there isn't a starting point, then these are the issues that arise as a result of
No, because your
eternal
whole
past.
issue comes up with there being a starting point infinitely far in the past. And I'm saying there is no starting point because that requires a point that corresponds to negative infinity, and that is not a coherent concept in mathematics.
Say this a little bit slower because I really feel like we're getting to the crux of the issue now. Say that slower so
I'm
I can
saying
just
you're
completely
starting with
unpack
a
what you're
false
saying.
premise that infinitely far in the past is actually a point in the past. And that is fundamentally not true.
I'm not saying that there is an infinite point in the past. I'm saying it's a finite point in the past. That's the whole thing.
I'm saying your argument
built on-
against there being a point infinitely far in the past has in it the false premise of treating it as some point in the past infinitely far away. And that
I
leads
still
you
don't get what you're
to
trying to
this
say.
mistaken conclusion.
Let's try it another way because I don't completely understand your rebuttal. Are you suggesting that there is an eternal past, Aaron?
I'm saying that doesn't seem unintuitive to me. It doesn't seem impossible, but we don't know one way or the other yet because we still have not resolved quantum gravity, so we can't talk about things before the early hot state of the universe. So I'm going to just say,
that's fine.
I don't know.
Okay, but if we grant, for the sake of argument, that there was an eternal past, how can we go from an eternal past that has an infinite past to the present that we're all experiencing now? Can you explain that to me?
You take an infinite amount of time to cover the infinite distance. That's how you solve the problem. You don't do it in a finite amount of time. You do it in an infinite amount of time, 1 second per second.
Right, okay. And so how can we experience this goes back to, let's say, my domino chain analogy, and I don't see how in any shape or form this analogy breaks down. So you think of a line of dominoes stretching infinitely into the past, where each domino represents a moment in time. For the last domino to fall, which represents now, every prior domino must have fallen first. But if the chain is infinite, there is no first domino to start the sequence, meaning the last domino could never fall. And so an infinite past would prevent us from reaching the last domino.
This would break down. All you have to say is there was no first domino to start falling. There's just always been falling dominoes. In the same sort of way, you could take any number on a number line and go 1 unit back, 1 unit back, 1 unit back, unless you want to argue there is a smallest negative number.
So I still think you're missing the point. Even if we grant that there's been dominoes always falling, we would still never get to a point, which is the now, that represents this domino falling, because there's an infinite number of previous. Because there's an infinite
with an infinite number of seconds to go through all of those dominoes.
Yeah, but if there's an infinite number, we still wouldn't get to the present moment. That's the whole point of infinity. You wouldn't reach.
That's all.
Huh?
It just takes an infinite amount of time. And if we're talking infinite time, therefore, that's how long it takes.
Well, you see, look, there's two problems with that. A, on a mathematical one, which I don't think we're going to agree on because I don't think we're completely understanding each other. But B, on a scientific level, that we understand that time came into origin at the point of the Big Bang. That's what our standard
Big Bang
cosmology says. But that's what the general notion of science. We don't know that. I agree. We don't know it for a fact. But the general consensus from the scientific community is that time, space, matter, and energy came into existence at the point of the Big Bang.
That is not the consensus.
No, it is. There are very few fringe theories that suggest that time has always existed. But
wait, fringe theories. So you know my background?
No, but I can tell that you're very scientifically attuned. I've got that feeling from previous calls.
You might want to know his background, Amir.
Yeah,
Sorry?
I'm a PhD in physics. I'm a PhD in physics, and I'm a research affiliate at MIT.
Okay. And so would you agree? I mean, look, I've noticed that there's systemic issues with academic and funding structures of physics research. There's immense pressure to publish and secure
I'm
grants.
self-funded, actually. I don't actually even get paid by MIT. I basically go there and say, hey, I want to hang out in your labs. I have a job that can pay for me on my own. And they say, cool beans, come on and join. So I don't have any of those issues of academic funding, and somehow that's driving me towards different math. I don't even know where this is trying to go. But Amir, don't tell me what the consensus is, then tell me the consensus is flawed because of funding.
No, I'm just saying that there's a lot of theories that are published out there that have been published just more due to pressure and the general. Look, I'm not going to put my hand up and say that I'm a PhD. I've got a PhD in physics, but from the people that do have PhDs and are at the forefront of science, the general consensus is that time, matter, space, and energy all came into existence at the point of Big Bang.
No, and there's actually a book you can go and read about this called The Battle for the Big Bang, which is actually about the various different models currently in competition for what's the best explanation for the origins of the universe. And also they did some polling and asked a bunch of people at a cosmology conference, hey, did the universe begin at the Big Bang? And the vast majority of them said no. So when you tell me what the consensus is, that tells me you haven't actually checked what the real literature is.
Sure, but whatever other explanations we can fathom, like let's just say the multiverse theory, they're all amenable to the same points of critique that we have for just the universe. That okay, if we grant something like the multiverse, then
Amir, that's a different argument than you just said. You said the consensus among physicists is that time began at the Big Bang. I called you out on that, and now you're acting like it's a different argument. No. Let's actually get this one hammered out first. There is not a consensus that time began at the Big Bang. That is probably the minority view at this point, but we don't actually know. And there are many competing hypotheses. And the reason there's competing hypotheses is that we don't know. And we're trying a whole bunch of different methods to see what can try to explain the most data, what seems to have the fewest number of premises, what can actually explain other phenomena along the way. That's where we're actually trying to make promise. It's not just we're trying to come up with things out of desperation for funding. It's we don't know what the right answer is. And so scientists are trying all sorts of different things. And we're going to find out through further investigations which ones work the best, which is actually how science has worked for 500 years and is doing a pretty good job.
So what camp do you sit under in terms of what you think is the most likely explanation for the cause of the universe?
I don't know, but one of the hypotheses that I do kind of like, because it also helps explain the era of time, is a model from Sean Carroll that basically has time going in two opposite directions from our point that we call the Big Bang. And because the universe is expanding in different directions, that actually helps point the direction for the increase of entropy, which gives us our era of time. So effectively, before the Big Bang, quote unquote, time goes in the opposite direction as we experience it in our universe. And because this can actually explain the era of time, it actually feels plausible as an avenue to explore this.
Is this the Wheeler-DeWitt equation?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought that's what Sean Carroll advocated.
So Amir, I think that we have reached a good spot to kind of pause and say, maybe let's pick this up next time. Like you can look into some of these alternative ideas that Aaron has proposed. But unfortunately, as the host, I got to keep us moving, and I've been informed by our producer that we have a whole lot of super chats to get through. So, do you have any sort of final thoughts before we end this? You can call next time Aaron is on and pick up where you left off.
Well, look, first and foremost, thank you so much for giving us theists the opportunity to be able to call in. I will just make a very, very quick point that, some people are just naturally better debaters. They're quick with words, persuasive in tone, confident on the mic. But that doesn't necessarily make them right. It just makes them good performers. And the best speaker isn't always the one with the best ideas. Sometimes they're just the best at packaging those ideas. So in a setting like this, where persuasion can be mistaken for proof, I think we need to be especially careful. So I'd encourage everyone listening, don't just ask who sounds more convincing, who who sounds more convincing. Ask which ideas actually hold up, even when stripped of style, convenience, and performance. Yeah, and I'll end it with that. Thank you so much again.
Thanks, Amir. Take care.
Eric, do you want to learn how to Mongolian throat sing? Check this out.
No, I don't.
Try.
No, keep that shit to yourself. Don't hear it.
Anyway, thanks for watching that clip. Patreon.com/calltheline is where you could support us. And maybe you should subscribe and like the video because it was a killer video. Or maybe it wasn't. Was it a Forrest video? If this was a Forrest video, you don't have to click like. If it was an Eric video, go ahead and click dislike.